Our next speaker was a co-author on the famous Floss-Pauls report about women in open source. Contrary to what Denise Cooper said yesterday, saying it was written by all men. She is an anthropologist at Intel, which sounds like a strange job description. But she researches things like how patterns of mobility affect technology, statistical modeling of adoption rates, and just generally giving them a better idea of how technology is used in international markets and opening their minds to new ways of seeing technology and new opportunities. So I'd like you to welcome Dawn Nafis.
Thank you. I have no shit jokes, unfortunately. I apologize for this. I think as Allison's introduction might have given away, this talk might be slightly different from some of the other presentations you've heard, in that I am an anthropologist. And so, as you'd expect from an anthropologist, I'm going to talk about the broader social context in which open source technologies are now situated. And so I framed what I have to say around what I've called 3 challenges. That is, 3 areas of rapid social change, 3 areas where we think there are real contributions that technology as a whole can make, and also specifically areas where the involvement of open source communities can bring real social and economic benefits to the picture. In the interest of the bad anthropologist joke, you might wonder what the hell an anthropologist actually does all day at Intel. What I can tell you is that it's not futurology, it's not sort of getting out the old crystal ball and coming up with these outlandish futures. It's about talking to people, listening to them, analyzing the broader social system in which they live, and thinking through what it means for societies to undergo long-term systemic change. This picture is actually of a colleague. One of the things we do is take traces of computer usage data back into people's houses and have a conversation about what is and isn't actually meaningful about the technology use. One of many methods. So my 3 challenges for you today are not, they're of the long-term variety. They are not things that are going to be solved easily or today. So hopefully you'll be exhausted by the end. Challenge 1. If you live in an industrialized country, chances are pretty good you live in an audit culture. And by that, I mean that as a society, we make lots and lots of traces of everyday activities, right? What you do on the internet, who you speak to, where you go, your mobile phone company can have a pretty good idea of where you are based on the cell tower you're accessing. Sensors are becoming more and more important in our daily lives, and as a result, we are awash with large data sets, which I'm sure has been an important topic for many people here. From a technology point of view, this stuff is really exciting. Right? Intel has a gaggle of machine learning people who get very excited about this sort of thing. We now have the compute power to sort of deal with these kinds of data sets. But the question that I'm concerned with, and I'd like for you to think about as well, is not so much the privacy big brother issues that are at stake, and those are very large and those are very real. But I think we need to take a step back even further and ask something pretty fundamental, which is, what does this data really tell us? What does it really mean? How do we give life to it? And specifically, I have in mind sort of getting beyond the kind of simplistic and, in my view, kind of tedious business model of, let's throw the advertisement at the passerby based on location data. Problematic for lots of reasons. One of the things that I think happens in this space is there's a kind of seduction of sorts. There's a kind of a bright shiny object sort of effect going on. And that is, I think, those kinds of business models emerge because there's this notion that adding more and more data somehow is the same thing as adding context, right? That somehow the data, the algorithms in and of itself gives you context. And I think those things are valuable, right? I'm not sort of being anti-math, anti-large data set here. Quite to the contrary. What I want to do is to think through how we can make those valuable. And one way you can make it valuable is by thinking a little bit clearly about what adding context actually is. So 2 examples here. One are sort of mobile friend finding technologies, where you take sort of location data, data about friendships, buddy lists, you get a trace of where your friends are around the city. What that's delivering is actually not contextual at all. You're delivering data, right? There's no way in which people can actually play with that, can communicate with it. It's not meaningful in and of itself. There was a wonderful experiment done by Barry Brown in a university context where they leveled that data into really crude categories: home, work, school, other. They created this ambient display in the home. And because they up-leveled that data, and it was vague enough, it was pretty, it was as precise as real conversations are. And that's actually really important. There's, to give people that space to sort of create communication, to reassign what counts as work and what counts as home, right? Gives people the opportunity to have something to communicate, right? Data does not communicate in and of itself. And I think this is really important as the data sets get more and more sophisticated and as we know more about people to really get this right. Because if we don't get this right, the world gets a whole lot creepier, right? We get creepy advertisement. So hard problem number 1, and the other thing I want to say is that this is not a UI issue only. This is also an issue about philosophy, what it is you think data is and what it does. Challenge 2 has to do with global crisis of food and water. I think we're probably all aware that fuel prices have skyrocketed, food prices have skyrocketed, food and water supplies around the world, both in developed and developing countries, are no longer secure. And I think what's particularly interesting for free and open source communities here is that you guys are really good at decentralizing power. And I think there's something that can happen here that makes that move. And that's where I think the technology can really come in. So just some numbers here. 1 in 3 people now face inadequate water supplies. Again, it's a problem that exists in Southern California as well as rural China, right? Something that brings us all together. There's this really interesting news bit on the BBC recently about farmers in the United States who now use mules rather than tractors in order to save on fuel costs, right? There's something afoot here that's happening. It is quite serious. I think the thing that's interesting for technology is actually the third figure, which is this fact that half the world derives its income from agriculture. And we as technology people make a whole lot of urban assumptions, right? We build things for the most part that sit on desktops, indoors, preferably with air conditioning, right? And it's the case that if half the people in the world are getting their income from working in the fields, there's a sense in which this sort of broader move to get off the desktop, to go mobile, sort of has a kind of a new resonance. It actually has a really profound effect on the kinds of problems that technology can start to solve, the kinds of people we can start engaging with. There are lots of moves right now being made into participatory citizen science, participatory urbanism. One of the ways that technology can help is give sensing technology to ordinary citizens in order to level up exactly where the problems are, right? It's a lot harder to sweep problems under the carpet when you have this kind of picture that's built collaboratively. One of my favorite projects took place with hunter-gatherer communities in the Congo. These are people who rely on trees for food. The trees are their food source. They also live in an area where loggers are harvesting timber. And actually, interestingly, they don't really mind the loggers. As far as they're concerned, the forest is for everybody. And so what they've built, they've been working with an NGO to do this, they built this ruggedized GPS unit that geotags the trees that are particularly important food sources for them. They're also able to do this for religious sites, graveyards, none of which an outsider could really see. And as a result, the technology enables a new kind of conversation to happen, right? Because of this technology, it's no longer a winner-take-all type thing. There's actually a conversation happening between people who are powerful and the people who have less power. Last challenge, exhausting in 55 seconds. Excellent. We'll strengthen the global growth in technology production. It's a sheer fact of life that programming knowledge is unequally distributed. But what I'd like to leave you with is the challenge, and I think this is a big company challenge more so than a small product challenge or a small project challenge, of thinking beyond our current paradigms of where good markets are and where good partners are to be found. And I think specifically the language that continues to be used around mature and emerging market, as if they sort of weren't there and now suddenly bam, right? Developing and develop, this kind of language is becoming obsolete and we need a new way of thinking about it. One of the things that we've done at Intel, in collaboration with Washington, is to try to find the places in the world where technology adoption has actually outpaced global share of wealth. And all of a sudden, the world starts to look a little bit different, right? Eastern Europe starts to become a really interesting place. China and India can no longer be talked about in the same breath. This is one of many lenses we can start to use, but I think we need a new way of talking about and thinking about our relationships with other parts of the world. Thank you, that's it.